So the purpose of this session is really to get the perspective from a specific stakeholder group, namely the utilities, about renewables and what's going on in different jurisdictions throughout the north and in remote areas of BC, just to provide kind of directly from the horse's mouth of what are their ambitions, what are their concerns, what are some considerations, and how projects have been rolling out from their perspective. So I'm Michael Ross, I'm the Industrial Research Chair in Northern Energy Innovation at Yukon University. And in full transparency, we lead a research program out of Yukon U that is funded and directed by the utility members sitting here. And so when we pursue projects and programs, we want to make sure that it addresses the utilities' needs and concerns. And a lot of this information is not really confidential. There's no reason that it should be withheld from the public, and even an opportunity to share that message with everybody. So what we're going to be discussing here is directly the utilities' perspective. And what I'll do is I'll get everybody on this panel to quickly introduce yourself and the utility you work for and the jurisdiction in which you operate. Please.
Hello, I'm Bridgette Zacharias. I'm the director of our non-integrated area planning and strategy group at BC Hydro. And so we're in British Columbia. By non-integrated, what we mean is there's 14 communities in British Columbia where we provide the electricity, but they're not connected to the main provincial grid. So they're all isolated individual microgrids.
Morning, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. Chris Milner, President and CEO of Yukon Energy. We're a publicly owned utility that generates, transmits, and in some cases distributes energy across the Yukon. Thank you.
Good morning, I'm Alex Love. I'm from the Northwest Territories with NTPC and NT Energy. We generate and distribute power all across the Northwest Territories. There is another utility who will introduce themselves in a moment. And our generation mix includes hydro generation, wind, solar, liquefied natural gas, and diesel.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Ernest Douglas, and I'm with Qulliq Energy. We're the sole energy provider, electricity provider for Nunavut. It's great to be here. Currently, we're mostly diesel-generated utility, so we're new at this, and you'll hear me say that a few times today. But thank you for the warm welcome to your land.
Don Jay, good morning. Jay Massie. I live here in Whitehorse. I work for ATCO Electric. Here in the Yukon, we work with Chris. We're mostly distribution, but we operate the isolated communities here in the Yukon. And then through our partnership with the Dene Nations and the NWT, I also work there in 8 communities with Naka Power.
Thank you. So what we'll start with is, could you give a quick overview of the energy landscape within your respective jurisdiction, and specifically focusing on what's going on with renewables? We'll start with BC and then go north and then make our way out east.
Okay, thanks, Michael. So in British Columbia, as I mentioned, we have 14 non-integrated areas where we provide the electricity. In those 14 areas, about right now, 55% of the electricity is generated using diesel and about 45% using renewable, which is hydro. And our strategy is to work with those communities, they're almost all Indigenous, to change the mix and grow the amount of renewable power that we have in those non-integrated areas. So the strategy that we've been following is that the First Nations are developing renewable generation. They're building it and then operating it. We are working to put in place energy purchase agreements to purchase that electricity. And then we're doing all of the station and infrastructure upgrades that are needed in order to integrate that renewable energy. Because the renewable power that's being developed is variable, whereas about 6 projects are solar and 3 are run-of-river. So there's 9 projects in total in 9 of those non-integrated areas. Because it's all variable, with the solar projects, we are planning to add battery energy storage into the system, and for all of them, we're also going to need microgrid controllers and other upgrades. So these station upgrades are pretty extensive. We are so depending upon the project, there are different parts of the life cycle. The ones that are most advanced right now is we're working with Algacho First Nation in Anaheim Lake. They have a project to develop a 3.8 megawatt solar farm, and then we're adding a 6 megawatt battery and doing a lot of station upgrades to integrate that power. So we're looking to have that one in service in February of 2026. And then we're also working on a number of additional projects, particularly with the Haida Nation on Massie and Sandspit, and with other First Nations as well.
Thanks, Bridgette. For Yukon, the picture is similar in some ways and different in others. We're starting from a position of very high percentage renewable. We're about, even on a really low water year, we're about 80% currently this year to date. But on a longer term average, it's closer to 90 and sometimes above 90. So what we're trying to do to fill the gap on the remaining, percentages is add renewables as well. And we've seen quite a lot of progress here in the last several years doing that. Several solar projects have been added to the system. There's quite an extensive microgen project as well. But the projects that we're quite interested in are the ones that focus on winter energy. Our challenge is really around keeping up with demand, to be honest, during the winter months. I mean, we're seeing loads that are 3 times what we see in the summer. So really what we're looking for and building our strategies around is specifically addressing those winter demands. So really focusing on our seasonal demands. The things we're excited about, we have seen, and I'm sure that this has been mentioned in the opening remarks through Chief Smith and others, but we've seen the first wind project come online in a grid-connected wind project. There are others in the Yukon as well that you'll hear about. However, connected to the grid, we have 4 megawatts on top of Heckle Hill, and we're starting to get good information from that on how that can contribute to our winter energy challenge. We've got grid-scale battery, 40 megawatts installed, coming online later this year, and that will really help with both conditioning the intermittency of solar in the summer and wind in the winter, but also helping with really rapid starts and restoration of our system, as well as shaving peaks when we have heavy loads in the winter. So our strategy has been much like BC's. We've had the most success with projects that are having a meaningful First Nation involvement, ownership, leadership. Those have been the ones that have been able to move the quickest. They've been the ones that have been able to contribute the best to the system, and that's the strategy moving forward as we work to add more renewables to our system. I'd say we'll probably get into where we're currently at, but we have a trifecta of pressure on the system in terms of growth, electrification, and just overall demand on the overall system, and that is really driving the need to stabilize the current system. And that's our priority right now is really making sure that our existing hydro can continue to provide renewable energy long into the future. Massive investments going into that right now from the utility, and then adding on modernization efforts and ultimately additional renewable energy once the system is stable. Thanks.
Jake, would you mind talking about ATCO, Yukon, and ATCO Power?
Yes, sure. So for us, again, we're mostly the distribution company in the Yukon, but in those isolated communities, there's 4. So they're diesel power plants that operate 24/7 until recently. So the really good thing is that in each of those communities, there is a community-sized renewable project, either in place or about to be in place. Old Crow it's been operational since 2021. You've seen the wind turbine is up in Burwash, so that'll be operational this year. Beaver Creek is quite advanced also, and Watson Lake is fully funded and proceeding along. And the renewable projects there, the 3-year solar, Burwash's wind, they are designed, they are big enough to carry the load of the whole community at times. So it's very impressive that when the renewable energy is available, there's a battery system also connected. Our power plant will shut down, it goes silent, and then the community is supplied by, the entire community is supplied by renewables. So that's pretty impressive here in the Yukon for those isolated communities. On the grid side, again, it's more Chris and his team run the generation. We're involved with just ensuring that the distribution system is strong enough for all these loads. It's an incredible electrical load that we have in the Yukon. So for those that don't know, the majority of the homes are electrically heated. I would say 100% of all new homes are. And as Chris mentioned, just with the growth in population and the heating load, the electrical load on the system has skyrocketed in the last number of years. So it really is a challenge for our teams, Chris to supply the energy and us to move it properly to the right spots. So that's the Yukon. In the NWT, we've worked with the government on just trying to develop. They do not have their IPP policy out yet. We've worked in our isolated communities there. Wekwity and Sambake have submitted for funding to look at similar projects for their communities. I mean, similar to the Yukon, where you'd have a large renewable project. Comparably, for those small communities that can be put in place, it would be a very similar model where once you get a large enough renewable load, you need a battery and that microgrid controller that coordinates with the utility system. So those are being looked at in the NWT, but that's as far as that has got so far for our communities.
Yeah, for the NWT, some similarities to the Yukon and some differences. Like Chris was mentioning the large amount of hydropower. It's the same in the NWT, where think about generally 85% hydropower. That's due to the hydro facilities that serve loads like Yellowknife and on the South Slave communities like Hay River, Fort Smith, Fort Resolution. And it's not immediately obvious to a lot of people, but actually we're fundamentally a hydro utility, but it's all hidden away at fly-in hydro plants. We're in a process of renewing and life extending those hydro plants because a lot of them were installed in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, and so doing major overhauls on those plants so we can get another 50 years of hydro production out of them, and we're kind of midway through that program, having upgraded a number of units and got several to go. In terms of renewable energy, we've had a couple of recent success stories. One was the wind project in Inuvik, which was commissioned in summer of 2023 and has been running ever since. And last summer, an IPP had a 1 megawatt solar array, which was commissioned in August of 2024. We do also have some, similar to what Jay was talking about, Colville Lake. We've got a community that periodically, from time to time, runs solely on renewable energy. And so that's quite I think also a good success story, because I see it is the way of the future, and there's going to be just more and more and more of that.
All right, thanks, folks. So the last one, also kind of the last to come to the table around renewable energies in our territory as well. So for those of you that may not be familiar, we have 25 independent, isolated communities within Nunavut, and that's it. None are gridded. Largest being Iqaluit, of course. All are generated by diesel, of course. So we have a handful of net meter customers, as well as a few commercial institutional power producers as well, which is great, but the benefit is really only to the end user on both of those. So what that means is that we have a tremendous amount of opportunity to move forward. And as the Crown Corporation that's responsible for the delivery of electricity in Nunavut, I think it's incumbent upon us to partake in things like this, understand and really kind of benefit from all of the things that my colleagues here are saying that we haven't yet. So we want to do this right. It's clear that we're late to the game, and again, I said it again, I'll probably say it again. We really are, but historically we talked about challenges being the stuck points, but with every challenge there's an opportunity, and I think that that's the mindset that we have to move forward with. And we're excited about it. There are some challenges still, but we're going to look at them with a different mindset. I think it's important that investing in what's abundant, what's local, what drives communities, especially in these times, especially with what's going on in terms of trade tariffs and south of the border. I think it's important to build that resilience within our communities, and really that's the path forward. So again, just starting the game on this, we have some proponents for IPP. So when I say that, it's independent power producers within the territory, and we're excited to work with them. We've been building the relationship with them moving forward. So there's great things to come. Thanks.
Thank you. So there are developments of projects in all of your jurisdictions, and it's very easy to look at the utility as a black box and say there are so many delays. Why is everything taking so long? But there are definitely challenges and things that you must consider, things that you must overcome, some nuances in order to see a successful project. So what must a utility overcome in order to support a successful renewable project? Like, what's going on behind the scenes? What are some considerations that you must overcome? What are the challenges that you're seeing for these projects that are maybe causing some of these delays or cost overruns or anything of the sort?
Looks like people are looking at me, so I guess I'll start. I'll just give you a little bit of context before I mention a few things. So I've worked at BC Hydro for quite a while, over 30 years, in a lot of different departments in the organization, and I came over into our non-integrated area about a year ago. And each of these 14 non-integrated areas are like 14 little utilities, because they all have their own generation systems, distribution systems, et cetera. And they're very different communities too. And so they're like 14 little utilities, like I said. And so as we started to build out the program too, we've been working with the First Nations, giving them, working together on technical working groups, we've been calling them, as they've been looking at the resources developed in their communities. And then in the last year, we've really gotten focused on, well, what are we going to have to do on our side in order to integrate all this variable energy? And what I came to appreciate being new to this field is, or this new area, is that integrating variable renewables into isolated microgrids is actually a new thing. It's technically leading edge. And so the batteries, the microgrid controllers, which are like supercomputers that are like hooked into the load, into the battery, into the solar plants that the First Nations are building, but also integrated into the diesel gensets, which sometimes are like 50, 60, 70 years old. Not 70 years old, maybe built in the 1970s, that's what I meant. So you can appreciate it's sort of like, turning over like an old dial, like analog phone and going, where do I put the USB? Like that's the technical challenge that our folks are trying to overcome, right? And, electrical systems are like a modern miracle. In an isolated microgrid, they're very, like, they're delicate, they're fragile. And anybody who lives with one knows that there's reliability issues, there's power quality issues, et cetera. And so, we as a utility, we need to keep the power on. And in these isolated microgrids, like electricity is more important than ever, right? Like they depend upon them for like freezers, heating, things like that, food security, et cetera. So we want to make sure that the system's going to be reliable. So you can imagine in a situation where, the solar plant's producing, everything's going fine, and a cloud comes over. Well, that battery better kick in a millisecond. Or the diesels better kick in a millisecond, or else we're going to lose the grid. So these are we're talking about integrating 21st century modern digital equipment into a 1950s system. That's what we as utilities are faced with. And there's not a lot of like this, we're all kind of like charting new territory here. And so I'm looking at Evlo. Evlo is our manufacturer for the battery systems that we're building, and he's nodding as I'm talking, because it's challenging. It's technically challenging, and everybody's kind of like in this uncharted territory, all learning and pushing through together. So that's kind of why it's taking. It feels, I can appreciate how it feels that it could be feeling like it's taking a while. Building solar plants, like that's proven technology. The cost of panels and all that kind of stuff has come down in the last decade. It's relatively straightforward, which makes it very accessible for communities, which is fantastic. You can get the solar panels in, you can lay out the rails, throw them on, all that kind of stuff, hook it all together. But what we need to do on the utility side to integrate it all, make sure that it's stable, it's like a combination capital project and IT project all blended together. So it takes a lot of people, it takes a lot of expertise. And the other thing that I'll just mention that we're also now grappling with is because it takes a lot of people, and we're doing this in remote communities, we have to think through accommodations, logistics, those types of things as well. So there's a lot of complexities in planning out these projects, but everybody's very committed, and we really are moving forward, and I think it's going to be a great 5-10 years where a lot of these projects are going to get built, and I think momentum is absolutely building.
Maybe I'll add in, and I love the analogy of the rotary phone and USB, but I'm sure you're going to have to explain what that is to the youth at some point. It is installing these renewables, so I'll use Old Crow because it's been operational since 2021. And it's the isolated, most northern community in the Yukon. It's fly-in only. It's north of the Arctic Circle. Logistical challenges is extremely important and difficult to wrap your head around. But that grid, that microgrid, has become incredibly complex now. These are technically challenging projects. And when you do this to these isolated communities, one of the challenges we have employees. Most of them are based in Whitehorse. We have one in Haines Junction and a handful in Watson Lake. We do not have employees in every community. So when you make a grid very complex, it's difficult. One of the more difficult things is just getting it to communicate, the renewables to communicate. You think about everything that needs to happen for the renewable, the solar field gets up to a certain production level. It communicates with the battery, that communicates with the microgrid controller, that tells the power plant to idle down, start shifting the power over to renewable, shut down. All that has to happen in microseconds. And if there's any hiccups with that, north of the Arctic Circle, it takes a little while for us to respond. So I think that is one thing that we've learned. I would say we knew that it was going to be challenging in that aspect. I don't think we did a good job as a utility explaining that to proponents. Because it's very When you see, in that instance, solar panels connecting to a house, pretty straightforward. There's no moving parts. It's easy to assume that it's going to be rather easy to do, but it is incredibly challenging and complex on the electrical side. And thankfully, I don't have to do that part. I'm thankful for that.
Sure, I'll go next. My colleagues have touched on some of it, and what I would call it is, from a utility perspective, reliability is paramount, and cost impact is right after reliability. And my friends here talked about the complexities of integrating these systems and making sure that they stay on, like they mentioned. If something goes wrong in a microsecond, you've got a 1 or 2 hour power outage, and that's very inconvenient for the community. It can also be very expensive when you're flying people in on charters to go and deal with it. None of that helps rates. So those things are paramount to the utility, but they're not reasons for not doing it. They're just considerations that need to be thought through. The other part I want to say is the logistics part. And doing projects in remote communities, the logistics are just magnified, like 10 times or something like that compared to what it would be down south. And that turns into project delays and cost overruns so easily. For example, when we were constructing the Inuvik wind turbine project, there was some truck collision with a bridge somewhere in the Yukon that caused a load limit on the bridge, which meant the steel for the foundation couldn't get to site. Boom, instant delay from one summer to the next summer. And those things happen. It's not just renewable projects, it's all the projects. Renewables don't get an exemption from those logistic issues. So the upshot of that is there is a lot to think through. There are a lot of logistic hurdles to overcome, but those are the same issues we're dealing with on our conventional projects as well.
So much has been said, and I find myself nodding as well, in agreement. I think that the complexity and the technical challenges can't be underestimated. They're for all projects. They're not just for renewable projects, right? Like, we're connecting protections and controls around updating that for hydro systems is incredibly technical. It involves bringing people up from outside the Yukon, outside the north, outside Canada in some cases to adjust, and we're doing that on a regular basis. So that naturally applies to renewable energy projects. I will say, though, that across the north and in remote areas of BC, there is a common thread, and that is massive land, massive geographic spaces, and very few people. When you look at the accomplishments that we've seen in all of these areas in the area of renewable energy, I think we often underestimate their successes. I mean, everything that gets done by a person. So we talked about robots and technical things over here reacting in milliseconds, but ultimately what that means is that someone somewhere is responding to that. And sometimes they need, not a millisecond, but maybe 5 seconds or maybe 10 seconds so that they can avoid something that causes another person to go out in a truck and not look at an iPad and say, hey, where's this system problem? It's looking with their eyes at physical infrastructure to see where their problem is, to fix it manually. And that ultimately is what I think is going to impact the speed of renewable energy projects moving forward, is that it is in everyone's best interest that the utility is robust, that we invest in infrastructure so that we can move quickly with renewables. And I think if we get that sequence wrong, we will have a lot of challenges. I'll tell a story because stories are good, and sometimes they're about challenges. And this is about a challenge, and it's about supply chain, and it feeds off what Alex said, and just shows you kind of the intricacy of what some of the utilities are dealing with. We had a failure at a substation going into winter. Critical substation would have been a big problem if we hadn't gotten it fixed. We called the supplier. The supplier Hitachi, big company, said, get in line, we'll see you in 6 months, we'll prepare that in 6 years, if you want another one. So we reached out to partners. We reached out to BC Hydro. BC Hydro stepped in and helped us very quickly with something that we needed to get through that winter. This is the energy landscape right now, right? So there are, I just wanted to put an exclamation point on the fact that we're talking about technologies, but we're still, at least now, talking about people responding to problems. And I think the biggest challenge that has been underestimated, and as we push for really rapid growth of renewable energy, which is everyone's goal, is that somewhere along the line, there's a person that's responding to the impact of our actions. And investing in those people and the systems behind them is number one.
Well, that's a really good segue, because maybe it's where we're at in the journey, but opportunities around, I think it's relationships. And you'll hear me talk about that a lot, because this is really a collaborative effort that needs to happen. We talk about all the technical challenges, we talk about things like that, but what we really need to focus on is how we can all do this together. Because I think, like in my heart, although we're the sole provider of electricity in Nunavut, and that's diesel generator right now, in my heart I know that we know we have an opportunity and we have a mission to make that clean energy. And who better to know their communities but the communities themselves? And I think that, that's been long overlooked, especially in Nunavut, on, collaboration with communities and stakeholders and things like that. So I think it's important to look at that as a bit of a challenge, but also an opportunity, because, building this, one person can't build these things. And it takes a lot of different people, experiences, different mindsets to get to the end goal. And that's where we're at. So you have to trust your stakeholders. I mean, we don't build these things ourselves. All our IPP proponents are regional Inuit associations and their development corps for the most part. We got to build that relationship. And I think, if I was honest, it hasn't been a good relationship in the past. So those are some of the challenges that we're currently overcoming, is just finding out what's right for the community, seeing what the community wants, working with the IPP developers to kind of come to a solution, and then designing it not in silos, but together. Because ultimately, it's our asset at the end of the day, whether or not we own it or not, that we have to maintain. So those are some challenges that I just wanted from the social side of things. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm actually going to pick up on that thread. It's been said that change happens at the speed of trust. And in a lot of ways, let's do like a temperature gauge in this room. Who here loves their local utility? Fewer than half, at least. And they're right here. But
Addresses? Can we get some addresses?
So I guess in your eyes, like, if working together is a key component, especially with working in remote communities, working with Indigenous governments on renewable energy projects and IPPs, in your eyes, how can we all work together to that? What barriers need to be broken down? And this isn't just a question for the panel, this is also reflective. Like, what does the utility need to do in order to earn your trust? And from the utility perspective, what steps are you taking, or how do you see what is an ideal working relationship with different stakeholders?
I'll start. The projects that have been most successful are the ones that are done in partnership, and that those partners are mutually benefiting. The challenges are real, right? Like, we have legacy impacts of hydro facilities. Many of us, except for Nunavut, right? All of us, with the exception of Nunavut, have legacy issues with hydro that are significant and will take generations to overcome, right? So I think we need to show commitment to improvement in how we do things moving forward, be realistic about what we can do and what we can't do, and involve people in a meaningful way. And it's First Nations, it's Yukoners, it's people we're serving. We're a publicly owned utility, which means we represent the public and paid for by the public, and reinvested profits into the utility for the public. So building trust is going to be about showing incremental improvements, and we got a lot of work to do because there's a lot of legacy challenges going forward, on top of just meeting demands and evolving energy systems to how people want to use electricity, which is a high priority. So partnerships.
Yeah, I might just jump in on that. I think, like, just to pick up on that, transparency is so key. I mean, as utilities, I think there's a lot of mistrust from the public, and being transparent is of paramount importance in this. We really have to, at the speed of trust, I guess, is really the line that I'm trying to pick up on here. Is that we really have to have these open and transparent relationships with, not just our stakeholders, but our proponents, the communities and things like that, and just be honest, have open, honest conversations about what we can do and what we can't. I mean, we have some really great people that work for us that are securing funding from our federal partners for jobs, for instance, to create these economies in Nunavut. But we can't fill the roles. So, we mentioned that to our IPP proponents just to let them know, we need some help with this. We'd love to walk in lockstep with this and provide you with all the technical aspects that you need, but we need some help on that. So in some cases, there's provisions in their funding to allow for that because we just don't have the resources to do that. So again, it's not because we don't want to, but it might be perceived that way. And just having these open dialogues and transparent conversations really helps people understand that.
Yeah, maybe I could just add, I think in terms of collaborations to move renewable energy projects forward. In the trust point of view, I think it's important for the utilities to understand that communities can be different from community to community, so the cookie cutter approach that everything will be the same generally doesn't work. Might be that the previous approach has lessons learned and successes that can be leveraged for even greater success in the next one. We've got to be open that it might not necessarily be the same. And also, I think from the community side, we need to be open that it may not evolve exactly as they're thinking because there could be technical reasons why things need to be bigger, smaller, or slightly different. So I think all the parties have to be a little bit adaptable to some change as long as it's achieving the big goal. And the other thing I've observed a few times in my career is that at a certain point, parties need to take a risk and go ahead and build the thing. And one thing that's happened is that risk is avoided by keeping it in perpetual planning. But you got to recognize at a certain point, it's time to jump off the diving board and do it.
I'll jump in. I'd say one thing, definitely that the utilities own, and I should say from our perspective, we don't tell our story very well. So along your question, put your hand up if you love your utility. Who here understands their utility and the challenges that we have? I think back as Rosa and I had a conversation this morning about when we first started talking about the Old Crow project in 2011 or 2012, we had a big trust gap between us. And it took a long time. So 2011, the project just was in place in 2021. I would say there was a lot of that time wasn't just the technical challenges of the project, but bridging those trust gaps between us and the community, as well as even the funders, right? Had to understand it. I don't know how many times I heard this, like what's in it for the utility? What are you getting out of this? What are you up to? And so obviously there is that misunderstanding on our part. It is something that we own, and we got to get a little bit better at putting that information out there. Just how utility works, how the rates work, and what goes into rates. I think that's something that we absolutely got to get better at when you ask about what we can do better. The trust part, that takes time. There's a lot of good conversations to have, right? Christy and I had some bumps along the way for Burwash, but that's just getting to know each other and understanding where the utility comes from and where the community comes from and bridging that gap. Hindsight's 2020. I think we have some great relationships now. I should say that also for those that don't know, the 4 communities in the Yukon, those renewable projects are owned by the First Nation governments. They're the owner of that renewable project. So that is who we partner with. And it's just having those open and frank conversations and understanding where each side comes from is, unfortunately, takes time. I have no, even with hindsight, I have no magic wand to tell you exactly how to go about it, but yeah, that's it.
Yeah, just to build on the theme that you were talking about, Jay, just then and then earlier, I think it does come down, like there's many things, there's many ways to build trust, and there's many things that get in the way of that. But I think communication is really critical, and being open and transparent. It's also about, I think, the words that we use and how we come into the conversation. And, utilities by definition are filled with engineers. And sometimes being able to communicate in non-technical language, not with your mind, but also with your heart, I think is really important. And I've spent a lot of time within our organization with a lot of engineers in the room, and I can tell that they're talking from their heart. But when they go and talk with communities, we go into this utility mind engineer language, and it doesn't necessarily resonate. And so one of the things that I think we need to do is be a bit more vulnerable about what we're worried about, what we're trying to accomplish, and sharing that in an open way. And I'll just use a little anecdote just as an example of how words can just come across in the wrong way. So at BC Hydro, for those communities that I mentioned that are developing solar projects, we came out with an approach to the energy purchase agreement where we were going to pay for available, or we are paying for available energy. And this is very different, because normally when you sign an energy purchase agreement, it's based upon the energy that's delivered, the energy that actually comes across the meter and is actually used. And these are small communities, and among the reasons why we kind of went across the country and looked at how other energy purchase agreements were being set up at the community level. And one of the pieces of feedback that we got is that when it's done that way in a traditional IPP type of contract, your revenue follows the load, right? If there's a lot of energy being used in the winter, that can be a big revenue month. And in the summertime, at least for us, like a winter peaking utility, when people aren't using as much electricity, the revenue goes down. Doesn't necessarily mean that the costs go down, though, right? So that can turn into a revenue cost mismatch, and it has an impact on viability and so forth. So the folks at Hydro came up with the brilliant idea of, okay, we'll take some risk, we'll put together a contract on a different basis and pay for available energy. Well, that kind of came across as a lead balloon. Among the reasons why is because it wasn't explained very well, but as well, Hydro used this kind of language we're going to do this so that when we're constraining the solar plant, it won't impact the revenue. And so that word constraint came across as that was something that Hydro was going to deliberately do to constrain the solar and run diesel. And that was because our engineers were more comfortable with diesel. That wasn't it at all. It was, but they're using this word constrained because technically that's what ends up happening. The solar plant ends up getting constrained because the load isn't there. So these words were kind of being used and coming across and being interpreted in completely the wrong way. And it takes a lot to overcome those then misperceptions, right? So I think that's my kind of contribution to this conversation. I think that we have to be more conscientious of these words that we use and translate them to what we're really coming across wanting to accomplish, which is that really working in collaboration with communities, setting up long-term relationships, because we're going to be doing this together for a long, long time. People are going to come and go in our organizations, and what we want to do, speaking from BC Hydro, is we want to have these very strong working relationships that will last, organizational change on both sides, so that we're building systems that are sustainable and that everybody's going to be proud of into the future.
All right, thank you. I'm going to continue on this thread a little bit. There's so much to discuss about. I mean, I'm an engineer, and so talking about technical things. And I mean, realistically, there are a lot of challenges with remote communities. It's not an easy thing to do, and there isn't a lot of experience in this. I mean, we're not having a conference on how to drink water or how to breathe the air. This is new, novel things and a lot of risk involved with it. And this is why we're all here gathered. But on the theme of being kind of open and vulnerable, and this is my last question before opening it up to the floor, but from a utility perspective, essentially, where are you going? In terms of renewables, what does success look like to you from a pragmatic standpoint as well? And what are you personally hoping for? What is your vision?
Maybe I'll start. I think for me, I think the next step for renewables here, and mostly on the grid, because again, those isolated communities have 100% penetration rates, is just finer control of the renewables. And that comes down to safe, reliable power. We're just to ensure power quality is good and that the lights stay on. And for example, right, in the Yukon, the microgen program has been very successful. It's got to the point where it's actually can affect the grid. So we're going to need to get some finer control over this solar and renewables that's spread out across Whitehorse. It just to allow for more of it. Like right now, the program's on pause until we find some technical solutions. This is not us as utilities being against renewables. I 100% want as many renewables as possible, but we need the lights to stay on. That is when utilities are before you, that is the priority number one, safe, reliable power. So yeah, for me, I think that next step, finer control, and I don't know if that's storage abilities by distribution feeders or control inside people's homes, which is very difficult for a lot of people to get their head around. But that better visibility and control will allow for more access to renewables is where we're thinking the next step is.
I can go next. I'll give you a two-part answer, one sort of from a society point of view and one from a utility point of view. And from my society point of view, where I think we would be calling it success or moving in the right direction if we see basically a lighter footprint on the world, less fuel consumed, less GHG emissions, more energy produced locally, and so that we're more sustainable and less dependent on imports from elsewhere. From my utility perspective, my NT Energy hat, I think To me, success would be when the community sees us as the energy people, as the go-to people to talk about energy projects or new energy ideas that haven't been done.
I think two-part answer. First, tangibly, I think in Nunavut, what we need to see is a project that comes online that really has a displacement of diesel that's tangible, I guess. So we really need to see it happen. But my vision and my thoughts about this, go back to the more of the softer side or the social side, is that I think the measure of success would be if you were to fly into one of these remote communities and you didn't see a line of tank farms that had diesel fuel in them, and then you didn't hear the steady pound of a diesel generator in smaller communities. I think that's kind of my why around this in terms of renewable energy. So those are that's a big thing. But you talked about firm, reliable power. Having that at a renewable scale is pretty cool. So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, so echoing a lot of the same comments, but in the short term, it's all about reliability and building up the infrastructure to support renewables long into the future, not just now, but like long into the future. So that's a big investment, right? For when you're talking about hydro facilities, you're not talking about single-digit millions, you're talking about hundreds of millions, right, in terms of investment in these facilities. So certainly shoring up what we have to keep, that very high percentage renewable, moving into the future is a huge priority. I think that the future lays in partnership. Like I said before, we're large jurisdictions with small numbers of people. There's no one person that can do this on their own. It's about coming together, working together. We've talked about that a lot. And I think that the options that come from that can be many, but certainly a renewable future that addresses our primary challenges of delivering reliable energy in the winter is our vision, and we know that that's going to be done in partnership, and we know that it's renewable in the long run.
Yeah, I'll just add. So at the beginning, I mentioned that there's 9 projects that we're working on with First Nations in our NIA areas. And whenever you're developing partnerships and doing something new, there's this forming, storming, norming kind of part of building a great big team to do this. And I think in the last few years, we've been in the forming and storming part of it, both working with communities and them working with their partners and consultants and suppliers, and also us working on that internally. We've built a great big delivery team in order to deliver these projects. And so what I'm looking forward to in the next number of years is we go build stuff. We build stuff, we commission it, we bring it online, and then we're in this space of it's just how we operate around here, where we have all these renewables, we have joint operating committees, we're sitting down and working with the First Nations on their plans, kind of like they're planning their maintenance, we're planning our maintenance, we're doing it together, the lights are on, everybody's happy. That's what I'm looking forward to.
Excellent. I see we have 8.5 minutes left. We could open up for questions from the floor. Sorry, Rose is just grabbing a mic.
Thank you so much. Really great to have your conversation here today. You talked about the legacy of different projects on remote communities, primarily Indigenous communities. I work for the federal government. This is something we wrestle with every day. So my question to each of you on the utility side, what are you doing internally to build your cultural competency so that engineers don't go to the table and use words like constrained, perhaps? And what are you doing organizationally to move forward in good ways with your partners?
I'll start just on the cultural side. We every employee does Indigenous awareness training, and then we have also some specific training for any project leads that go into communities. It's just, and part of that training and those discussions we have is just how you approach the conversation. One of the key items I always took away is a lot of times project people, utility folks just want to get the project done. Okay, we got to do this, this, and this. And when you meet with the community, and especially elders, they're storytellers. So it takes a long time to have a meeting, and so there's just that disconnect between business and elders just on the amount of time it takes to talk through things. So that's just one example of the learning from that training that we give everybody, just really to get to a better start with the community for sure.
Quickly, so it's a really good question, really interesting, because I'm fairly new in the role, but I can start by boasting that we have 57% Indigenous employment in our organization. But I don't think that's good enough, because what we really need to do is engage with the communities, and I said that before, because you have people like me that are making decisions for the company, and you got to really make sure you're collaborative. So it's all down to your leadership approach and making sure people understand that you want to make the right decision for everybody, which is often difficult, especially when you're at the pointy end of the stick. So I would answer that by saying that we need to do better, even where we're at, with consulting our communities to make sure that what our vision for the future is in line with what their vision for the future is as well. So I'll take that one away. Thanks.
Yeah, for us, some similarities. We do a lot of Indigenous awareness training for our staff. We have Indigenous folks on staff, which just helps by osmosis. And in terms of meeting with communities, we're making more and more effort to go and meet with communities at conferences such as like this and in the communities, and that helps us to have a better understanding of the values of those communities and the people we're talking to, and the style of communicating, like the storytelling and so on. And it's all good when you understand where they're coming from and why they use that approach, and people are generally opening to understanding it, but it sometimes takes a little while to twig into what exactly is going on.
Yeah, good question. It's a learning process for us, for sure. We've come a long ways, but I think what we've done that looks differently on the ground is at a leadership level, we make commitments to do things better and work in partnership and work in collaboration. We've got agreements in place. We're advancing those agreements and trying our best to deliver on commitments. But I think where it really matters is what do the people in the communities think, and what does it look like in terms of what does different look like. And I think in my time with Yukon Energy, what I've seen that's different is that we have nations now influencing for the better our operating procedures, how we can better support the nation's interests in how we operate, and it's entirely imperfect in delivery. There's so much work to do here. However, there's incremental success. I see a lot of engagement on a daily basis at a technical level and at a leadership level, and I see more and more engagement at a citizen level in communities, and I think it takes all of that to kind of move forward. The challenge is that because it's a learning exercise and there's a lot of legacy, as you mentioned, there's a lot of work to do, right? So you have to keep going and persevere through the bumps in the road, as Jay mentioned with certain projects, and just always try to deliver that incremental improvement to do better. And we've got a lot of new people on our team that some people have been on the First Nation development side of a project, and now they're supporting and guiding us internally, which is very helpful because it provides a perspective that we need to have, and our commitment needs to be from the technical level to the leadership level, and that's what we're working on.
Yeah, what I'll add is we do a lot of the same things that my colleagues here have talked about at BC Hydro. But one of the things I just want to add is to recognize, as an example, like the impact. Like people have been talking about the impact Leona has had. And so I'm just going to make 2 comments that show that. In addition to our Indigenous awareness training that we give in Hydro, just over a year ago, Leona advocated for us doing something even more in depth, specifically related to the non-integrated areas. She advocated for doing cultural humility training, and so we did that. We started that a year ago, and we're committed to doing it every year as people are joining the NIA program, and also our suppliers are part of it. So that's one thing that we're doing and an impact that she had specifically. The other thing is in a number of meetings that we had with the NIA working group, Leona specifically talked about the importance of coming from the heart. And so that had an impact on us. And we talk about that often now within our organization. And as Chris said, it's imperfect. It's people are at different places, but we're all committed to getting there. So.
All right. Thank you. Unfortunately, that's the amount of time that we have, but please feel free to approach the utilities, ask them any questions, continue the dialogue. Can we get a round of applause for the panelists?
Hi, so we're going into our morning break now, but I just want to let everybody know that there's been a little bit of a room change, and the session that follows the 15-minute break that was initially intended to be in the Longhouse, that's the Wa'ilatu's Kinship and Prosperity discussion, that's now going to be in the Artists Studio, and the session that was going to be in the Artists Studio, which is a discussion around the regulatory piece for energy, which will be quite tied to some of the themes that we heard this morning, will be here in the Longhouse. Thank you, everybody.
Actually less